Have you ever wanted more flexibility with your job, but just felt stuck not knowing where to start? It can be really hard to know who to talk to or what to say. My wife Jess and I have about 20 years of collective HR experience, and that's why we work together to create a step-by-step process to negotiate more work flexibility. Let's jump into it. The absolute first thing you need to do is to identify the thing you want to accomplish. There are so many ways that you can gain work flexibility. That could be reducing your hours, condensing your hours to fit into a 4-day work week. It could even be gaining extra paid time off or other benefits. There are so many options. But the critical thing that you need to do, and this is really important, so I hope you listen to this, is you have to understand what it is you're looking for before you start any conversation. So this is important for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it helps inform who it is you need to talk to. Now that could be your supervisor, it could be HR, or even someone else on the leadership team. And the second reason that it's important is it gives you clarity, and that will ultimately position you well in any negotiation. If you jump into a negotiation without really being certain what it is you want, no one's going to take you seriously. So before you take any other steps, make sure you have clarity about what you're trying to achieve. Now, the second step in this process is to familiarize yourself with the current policies already in place. This is often as easy as opening up the employee handbook or manual and reading through those policies. Now, if your company does not have an employee handbook, it's often easiest just to go to HR and ask them for the current policies. Now, the goal in this step is to understand what's already in place. You're not trying to negotiate or start a conversation at this point. It's simply to understand what's already in place, what the current parameters are, and if there's already a policy for the thing you're looking to accomplish. For example, if you're looking for a condensed work week, it may already be in place. The policies will not only dictate whether it's possible, but also the procedures for how to make it happen. This will give you immense power when it comes to negotiating because you can understand what's important to them, and then you can speak to those values later on in this process. And if you run across any policies in your employee handbook that aren't clear or don't answer your questions around what's already in place, don't hesitate to ask those clarifying questions. And depending on the question, you can ask these to HR or your supervisor, but I would often defer HR as the first point of contact because they're going to have the most up-to-date information on policies. And again, at this point in the process, the goal is to gain clarity around what are the existing policies, where is their flexibility, and who is the decision maker if there is one. I'd refrain from any other questions beyond that point. The next step is to broach the topic with your supervisor. Now, how you go about doing that and the type of conversation that you have with your supervisor will probably determine how successful you are. Now, too often we think about negotiation as this you gotta play hardball, you gotta make these strict demands and threats built into them. That's not it at all. And often the best negotiation is often done in such a subtle way. And so I want you to think about this step as gaining an advocate. This is a step to communicate what you're hoping to accomplish and then getting your supervisor's support. That's it. You just want to get them working on your side. You're not trying to threaten them or communicate anything about what happens if you don't get this. It's really simply getting on the same page with your supervisor. The approach I often advocate for is something along these lines. This is something I'm thinking about. How can we make this happen? Did you catch the emphasis on the we? That was intentional. The best thing you can do is get your supervisor in your corner. The conversation with your supervisor has 3 main goals. The first is to identify and understand any concerns that they have. The second is to identify the steps or process to make it happen. And the third is to secure an advocate from your supervisor. Again, you want to get them on your team. The flexibility that you're hoping to accomplish is more likely to happen if your supervisor is on board. So when I was working as the HR person in my company, I can't tell you how many times a supervisor came to me and said, "Hey, I have an employee who wants to do this, but I think it's a bad idea. How should I respond to them? Now, there's probably an underlying issue with the supervisors avoiding conflict, but the more important thing is you have to get your supervisor on board. And if you do that, it's smooth sailing. Not only will you have support for it when you need it, but they're likely to advocate it for you and make the process so much simpler moving forward. So after you've had the conversation with your supervisor, the fourth step, and it may be optional, depending on the situation, you may not have to do this, but the fourth step would be put something formally in writing. This comes up when your company says, hey, we're happy to entertain this, but can you put something in writing? And this is often the case where an employee says, okay, great. And then 5 minutes later, looks around and thinks to themselves like, how do I do this? Well, you're in luck because I've written and received a ton of proposals and I've seen what works and what doesn't. And every proposal is different and needs to be tailored, but the best proposals all have a few things in common. Here's exactly what you want to include in your proposal. The first is you need the value proposition, both for you and your company. Really what you're trying to answer is what is the benefit both for the company and for you. You have to position it in a way where it's both beneficial for you and for the company. And if you can't achieve both of those, you're not going to succeed. And the value proposition will be different depending on what it is you're proposing. For example, if you're trying to accomplish a condensed work schedule where you might normally work 5 days a week, the standard 5 days, 40 hours a week, and you want to still work 40, but in 4 days, you're going to want to think about what the value proposition is for your company. One thing that comes to mind, so if you're traveling a lot and the company's reimbursing you for travel, think about the efficiency with travel reimbursements. If you're only traveling 4 days instead of 5, there may be savings for the company. Now, that's just one idea. There are so many options available to you, and you have to position it with the company in mind. Now, the next thing you need to include is external data points. This is the external research that will support your proposal. If you can provide evidence that other companies already offer this, or even better, that this is the standard or best practice, it elevates a proposal from a good idea to something that they must consider. So make sure that you're taking time, doing the due diligence, and understanding what the larger market is. And lastly, the thing that will make your proposal stand out is identifying the challenges. This is something that most beginners, when they're writing their first proposal, will often overlook because they want to make the proposal as positive and uplifting and saying like there's nothing that could possibly counter this. But in reality, there's always going to be considerations and things to take into account. If you can identify those challenges and then proactively address them, it's going to make your proposal that much more likely to succeed. So this is often the last step in the process for negotiating for more work flexibility. You've written out your proposal, you've submitted it to the decision maker, and he or she will take in all the information given to them and then make a decision. Now, despite how well you articulated your points and how well thought out your proposal was, the odds are that you will still receive some rejections. This leads me to my next point, which is what do you do if they say no? After all the time and effort and energy that you put into it, and they come around and they say, sorry, not gonna happen. What do you do with that? And my best advice is to not take it personally and to not fear this result when you're crafting the proposal. Too many times we can get so personally invested when we're putting together the proposal, having the conversations, doing all the due diligence, feeling like it's a no-brainer, and then we get the no, and then it crushes us and it can be devastating. Instead, use this as another data point to inform what it is you want to do as your next step. And whatever you do, don't feel like you have to resort to threats. Don't say, well, if I don't get this, I'm going to leave, or I'm going to stop doing X, Y, and there's no need for that. And if you find yourself in this position, you absolutely need to ask the question of whether it's worth staying in your current job. To help you with that decision, watch this video on the 5 warning signs that you need a new job. You may be surprised at how many of those apply to your situation. As always, thanks for watching and enjoy the journey.